My name is Richard Thornton. I'm a detective superintendent in the PSNI's Organised Crime Branch. Been in the PSNI just over 23 years. I suppose it goes back to primary school, the old cops and robbers type thing. That's what attracted me to it. People don't just get up one morning and decide, I think I'm going to rob an ATM.
They knew what they were doing and they knew the areas very well. Some of those machines can hold over 100 grand.
It was a huge challenge for us to cover that big an area with a finite number of resources.
This was going to get much, much worse.
It takes the number of these attacks this year alone to 6.
The 14th,
The 16th, the 18th.
24 ATMs.
The groups were nicknamed the Hole in the Wall Gang. It is at the investigators' peril that they underestimate the capabilities of OCGs.
The police were very heavily into saying it's not just a police effort to catch these sort of gangs and these criminals, that people needed to be vigilant and be alert as well.
there's been another ram raid
Following the
on a
robbery which
police
happened
have
in the
used
early
a
hours
digger
of this
to rip an
morning.
ATM.
We had no days off, no rest days.
Another cash machine
Last digger was also commissioned to
into
steal
this
2
latest
cash
ATM
boxes.
theft.
The pressure to bring this to a conclusion was immense.
At 4:30 a.m. A stolen digger enters the forecourt of O'Kane's filling station. Followed by a van of masked men. They used the digger to rip an ATM machine out of the shop wall, leaving a trail of destruction in their wake. The ATM is loaded onto another vehicle and driven off. The attack takes just 4 minutes. It is the 6th attack of its kind in Northern Ireland in just over 3 months.
In investigations like these, which are very, very fast tempo, you don't know where they're going to strike next, you've got to have a solid plan. In October 2018, I came into work when there was a report of an ATM attack. A digger had been used to literally rip the ATM machine out of the shop wall itself, using a digger which had been stolen from a nearby building site.
CCTV showed 2 masked men driving a BMW and towing a trailer that they later used to carry the stolen ATM from the scene.
It was clear to me that this was a very well planned attack, that the individuals concerned knew exactly what they were doing, very skilled in using the digger, but also very forensically aware, given the lengths they went to, which included setting fire to the digger on the petrol forecourt. They had absolutely no regard whatsoever for the safety of anybody. Their only concern was to conceal any evidence that they may leave behind. All in, they were gone in under 2 minutes.
The ATM they took with them was filled with cash. The men left the local shop in ruins. The vehicle and trailer used in the attack were found burnt out nearby.
Well, our colleagues in CID were tasked to the scene, along with crime scene investigators. The first steps was obviously the preservation of the scene and examine it for any forensic material that might be left behind. However, on liaising with my colleagues in CID, it was clear that there was no forensic opportunities left, certainly not in the forecourt, or definitely not in the digger or the vehicle and trailer that were stolen either. So at that time, the trail was ran cold very, very quickly.
Cash machine thefts were on the rise in parts of England. Richard was worried this could be the start of a new type of crime wave in Northern Ireland.
Organised crime groups from here interact with organised crime groups from there. And there's normally a lag. And so my concern was that those attacks would happen here at some point, particularly in the run-up to the autumn and winter months, where you have very short days and very, very long nights, because nights are the criminal's friend. I came into work and there had been a second attack. The exact same, a digger used in a rural area in County Tyrone.
The attack in Fintona was a carbon copy of the attack 5 weeks earlier. A stolen digger burnt out on a garage forecourt, a local business seriously damaged, the ATM casing transported away and broken into in a remote area. 15 days later.
This was just after 4 o'clock this morning. A stolen digger rammed into the side of the Spa in Killyclough. Thieves had attempted to tear the cash machine from the side of the shop, but residents were quick to react. The digger was set on fire after the incident. Police believe it was stolen from a nearby building site. The attackers may have failed in their attempt to remove the cash machine, but concern in the community is still high.
This was a pattern now starting to emerge, and one that concerned me as to where it would actually end. We were in the middle of winter and we still had a long way to go to when the night started to shorten.
Journalist Niamh Campbell covered the stories of the attacks and their aftermaths.
Where I'm actually from myself is a small area in Tyrone called Killyclough. It's very, very rural. I think we actually only have one ATM machine there. In terms of the sophistication and scale and frequency of that 2018, 2019 spree, I don't think anything like that has ever come under my nose before. It's funny because it wasn't actually sophisticated in that they were just ramming a digger into the ATM machine, but all of the plan that goes into it, all of the recon, around the area beforehand, they knew what they were doing and they knew the areas very well. It caused a massive flurry everywhere, and I think a lot of those rural areas felt forgotten and they thought, the police aren't really helping at the minute, so what if we get hit next?
Those communities that had already been hit were feeling the effects.
People assume that ATM heists, where there's nobody around, it's a victimless crime. But it's not. It has all, like any crime, it always has wider consequences.
Feeling sick just when I heard it at the start, but we'll get past it. We'll keep going.
You work hard, you build a business up here. It took me 3 years to get the bank to put the ATM in, and for guys to come in the middle of the night and take it out in a matter of minutes, it's very frustrating.
The problem with all of this is the local community is affected because the banks have closed and the ATM is used here by many people.
There's nothing to stop someone from doing this again to any other premises and any other businesses. So the business just watch out,
Given the pressure that police were under from the public at large to bring these to a halt, I knew that we had to take a different approach, something the public could see, something that would bring pressure to bear immediately on those groups that were responsible for this.
In just 4 months, criminals had carried out 3 successful raids with great precision. Richard believed this was the work of a professional organised crime group, or OCG.
The PSNI's organised crime branch is a proactive policing branch which go after organised crime groups, or as they're more commonly known, organised crime gangs, who are involved in different levels of serious crime. It is quite intense.
The appeal of these crimes for OCGs was obvious to Richard.
The main reason is money, and they need money not just to line their own pockets, but also most of the organised crime groups are involved in drug trafficking, and you need money to purchase drugs, to bring it into the country and facilitate the bringing in discreetly or without detection the drugs into the country.
Given the level of criminality involved, a specialist task force was set up, not only to prevent further cash machine thefts, but also to disrupt the OCG's other criminal enterprises.
OCGs themselves are very much like a jigsaw puzzle. Some are 100-piece jigsaw puzzles, some are 1,000, and some are 10,000. And so it's a very complex policing environment which we find ourselves in, and becoming ever more difficult and challenging to disrupt. A fourth attack happened, this time in Antrim, where a double ATM machine was stolen.
A large digger was also used to steal 2 cash boxes.
Those ATMs were stolen, again, very, very efficiently by the group involved. And they made good their escape very quickly after that.
The thieves were in 2 stolen vehicles, one of which was found burnt out nearby.
And the pace of the attacks increased dramatically.
What surprised me was that on the day after that, a further ATM attack occurred.
Forensic officers looking for clues following the robbery which happened in the early hours of this morning at this petrol station just outside Moira. Police believe a number of men were responsible.
The highly skilled and well-organised attacks left no question that detectives were witnessing a crime wave run by professionals who had the upper hand.
When an OCG plan an attack like this, be it an ATM attack, a robbery, or a cash in transit robbery, they will always have lookouts, they will always have a getaway car, they will always have a plan. And this was no different. The digger ripped the ATMs out, placed them onto a trailer and drove off, and the other individuals involved, of which there were several, got into various other vehicles and make good their escape.
I think this is whenever they started to get a bit more cocky, and they thought, we'll just hit places up in quick succession. Geographically, they're very close to each other.
The robbers smashed this stolen digger through a nearby fence before ripping the ATM out of the wall. They then set the digger, as you can see, on fire.
Considerable damage done to the shop itself, which temporarily forced it to close. Immediately, this became apparent to me that this was going to get much, much worse.
ATM attacks were springing up across Northern Ireland and the Republic.
In Northern Ireland, there's been another ram raid on a cash machine. Most of the raids have happened in rural areas using mechanical diggers to try to pull the ATMs away from the wall, but police still have no idea who's behind the attacks.
Almost every attack required in-depth knowledge of the surrounding area.
Well, my initial instinct on this was that they were local. When you carry out any attack, you always plan your escape just as well as you plan the attack itself. Therefore, you tend to commit such an attack relatively close to where your base is, so you can get away, get the ATM away, get the money out of it, then retreat back to your home without police or anyone else knowing who you actually are.
The local knowledge of the area is shown by the thieves, and the spread of attacks across Northern Ireland and the Republic left Richard convinced multiple gangs had to be responsible.
A hole in the wall where a hole-in-the-wall cash machine used to be. It's becoming a regular occurrence in Northern Ireland.
It indicates to me that there's a series of copycat raids going on where criminals recognise that in a matter of minutes you can take something like £120,000 out of an ATM this size, and it's absolutely scandalous.
But Richard needed more information.
My first action was to go through all of the information that we had, but also to get that community intelligence that we needed to clearly identify who was responsible and to report suspicious activity.
The task force appealed to the public.
We will continue to do all we can to catch those responsible. Tonight again, we will have local police patrolling areas which could be vulnerable to an attack, and detectives remain dedicated to investigating the thefts that have taken place. I assure you this remains a key policing priority.
As a result of appeals to the public through various media releases, our community intelligence picture started to increase dramatically. It confirmed that there was more than one gang. There was one in Antrim, there was one in Tyrone, and there was one in the South Armagh, South Down area.
Gardaí chased the gang operating in Monaghan and Louth.
My focus was on the Antrim OCG. They were the most prolific, they were the most efficient in many ways, and the tempo with which they were carrying out attacks was starting to increase.
Richard and his team now established a profile of the gang responsible for the attacks and an understanding of how they were operating.
People don't just get up one morning and decide, I think I'm going to rob an ATM, and do it very, very skillfully. That requires the group to covertly reconnoitre the area that they're going to attack, look for their escape routes. They need to be familiar with those surroundings, so if police do come, they know where to go to. They have somewhere to go to. The further they go away, the greater the risk of getting caught. They also have to know when the best time to attack it is, because when you attack an ATM, you want to know that there's money in it.
They were sussing the places out before they went. They were sitting outside the shops during the day. They knew when the ATM machines were filled up. Some of those machines can hold over 100 grand. So they were making sure they were getting the maximum amount that they could.
After it's been successfully reconnoitred and they've agreed on a time when they're going to attack it, they'll have a scout car out in front, making sure that there's no vehicle checkpoints, that there's nothing that may obstruct their way. The digger either stolen at the time, in the minutes before the attack, or pre-stolen and brought to the area. They have to get it away to an area where they feel safe to harvest the ATM. And harvesting the ATM requires the use of angle grinders, crowbars, sledgehammers. It's not an easy task to do. It's something that's going to take up to a couple of hours to do. They need to have the confidence that they can do that without being observed or overheard. They then have an amount of cash that they have to realise. That again is another strand. And they have to think about all of that before they actually commit the offence itself. So it's very prolonged. It is at the investigators' peril that they underestimate the capabilities and abilities of OCGs to carry out their criminality. This is why it is important to get into the way they think, what makes them tick. Because it's only when you understand them and how they plan and plot things, then that increases your chances of actually arresting them, charging them, and convicting them.
A bank was targeted in Newton Abbey. That makes it 6 successful ATM robberies using diggers since January.
Again, coming up bank holidays, they knew it would maybe be quieter on the roads, but The cash machines would be totally full. Literally exact same again. Digger, 3 o'clock in the morning, and the vehicle that was used to lift the ATM machine and get away was burnt out straight after too. It just felt so repetitive. It was the same thing over and over again. You nearly thought, is this actually definitely a new one?
This was the fourth attack carried out by the Antrim OCG. Attacks were becoming prolific across Northern Ireland.
The thieves were in 2 stolen vehicles. The robbers smashed this stolen digger through a nearby fence.
It is, they're stealing thousands of pounds on a regular basis.
The thieves have escaped with this ATM.
The case remains unsolved.
Thieves have used a digger to rip an ATM from the side of a shop in Hull.
Thieves took this digger from a nearby building site before ripping the cash machine from the wall of the Nisa store. They set the vehicle on fire before making off with the ATM.
A lot of damage caused. CMMO, another rural village ripped of a very precious service. They made their escape in very, very efficient form, but it gave us that little bit extra information.
As the thefts increased, Richard knew he had to find a way of getting ahead of the Antrim OCG. If he could identify the gang's potential targets, he could catch them red-handed. Richard needed to give himself an advantage and reached out to retailers and to the banks themselves.
My name is Simon Hutchinson. I chair the Northern Ireland Interbank Security Group. That group consists of the heads of security of all of the banks in Northern Ireland, the post office, cash carriers, Safer Cash, who look after basically the financial institutions across the United Kingdom. We all realised, okay, this is now a major, major issue. We were very fortunate that the detective superintendent in charge of the organised crime branch invited the group to come to his headquarters, and he was going to give us a full briefing. We were able then to tell that group, those teams, where every single ATM was in Northern Ireland, the description of the ATM, photographs, serial numbers, what mitigation technology-wise we had in place in each of those ATMs. And by the end of that meeting, we were able to identify circa 900 ATMs in sight, and that actually blew the superintendent away.
Surveilling 900 cash machine sites across Northern Ireland was an impossible task.
So with that, I applied certain criteria and essentially traffic light all of those ATM machines into red, which I considered high risk, amber, medium risk, green, low risk. And that allowed us then to focus, but also to get us ahead of the groups that were responsible, to increase our chances of catching them. That strategy had to complement the ATMs that we had mapped, because I had to make use of the uniform resources that we had available to us to give them clear focus, but also to trip the OCGs up into making a mistake.
Our business owners understood that and give us bigger budgets to spend more money on the mitigation of the high-risk ATMs.
Richard was also going to need all the help he could get. His task force alone couldn't monitor all at-risk cash machines in range of the Antrim OCG, nor did they have the local community knowledge of neighbourhood cops. He looked to the newly appointed district commander for Antrim for her specialist expertise.
It was a new start for me, a lot of responsibility, a significant number of officers and staff to lead and to manage. And I was aware at that time that the numbers of ATM thefts was starting to increase across the country. I took on the role of coordination of the local policing response for what we call North Area, which is 4 policing districts. So a large swathe of the country that we were trying to prepare a very visible response and deterrent to the ATM thefts that were occurring at the time. It was a huge challenge for us to cover that big an area with a finite number of resources.
What we actually needed to do is to maximise pressure on these individuals. It requires partnership and an understanding from the public. It's the only way to resolve these in the long run.
Richard knew Sue Ann's help could prove a turning point.
My role essentially was looking out into the community. So we were looking at prevention, provide that deterrent, a reactive capability, which was essentially around having police officers, high visibility patrols in vulnerable areas, and then also that community engagement and that reassurance.
It was very important that we got the public on side. There was a lack of community intelligence being received by ourselves. There was a lack of reporting on suspicious activity, but also a lack of understanding as to the impact that this was having. So that was something that had to change in order for ourselves to get ahead of this group or groups and to stop them from doing it.
At 3:30 a.m, a stolen digger and tractor make their way to the centre of the village. They stop at an ATM outside 2 coffee shops, rip it from the wall, and load it onto a getaway vehicle. They set the other vehicles on fire and make off in the direction of Portrush.
Just hours earlier, Market Square was ablaze after the digger and tractor used to steal the cash machine were set alight by thieves.
I was the owner of Lily's at the time of the ATM robbery. My name is Jeffrey McKillop. I'm a local lad from the village of Bushmills. All the shops are locally based. There's no multinationals here apart from the supermarkets. So it means any money that's generated in the village goes back into it. The night it happened, of course I was at home and I got a phone call early morning saying, look, you better get out here, something bad's happened. And whenever I got here, the whole diamond was sealed off. It was like something from a movie, you know. Police cars everywhere. In the background, you could see this massive hole in the wall. Just couldn't believe it. Well, the ATM was in the corner, you see here, but they ripped the whole wall out to get it. They had stolen a digger from a local outdoor pursuit centre, and then they stole the tractor from a local farmer. They placed the ATM on the back of a flat-back lorry, and they headed out of the village towards Portrush, passed in Lewis Castle, turned down left, but the ATM machine bounced off the back of the lorry onto the side of the road. After all the destruction and all the mayhem they caused to the village, they still walked away empty-handed. I think it's just disbelief. How would anybody feel they had the right to come in and violate our wee town, you know? And I think it shook them up a fair bit for a few days. And but as communities do and people do, they rally around and they get together and they get their head down and get on with it, you know. But still always in the back of their mind, you know, that it had happened.
Despite the police's best efforts, it seemed as though the Antrim OCG were always one step ahead.
As we moved into April 2019, myself and my team had been working constantly since we took on the operation in mid-February. No rest days. We had no days off. The shortest day we had was 12 hours, in most cases 16 to 20 hours.
Every time there was another ATM theft, that pressure mounted. There's no doubt about that. For me, the challenge as well was that this couldn't be our only focus. That whilst this was a priority and it was a critical incident for the organisation, and rightly so, we also had to deal with other types of crime that were happening.
The tempo quickly picked up during the course of April. We had multiple gang sprees right across Northern Ireland. It was a very high pressure situation for us all. Tiredness was creeping in. Exhaustion was creeping in.
It was deflating, personally deflating, but equally I knew that we were close. Unfortunately, these individuals were evading us, and that was frustrating.
Richard needed more intelligence, but time wasn't on his side, and there was a problem.
The police were very heavily into saying it's not just a police effort to catch these sort of gangs and these criminals, that people needed to be vigilant and be alert as well, but very hard to do whenever it's happening between the hours of like 2 a.m. and 5 a.m. in those really rural areas where there's not a lot of light.
And for some of the public, their sympathies lay elsewhere.
A number of years previously, we had the financial crash, and there was almost an air that this was a Robin Hood type crime, that they were stealing from the banks, to quote many of the social media posts that were put up, and that the banks deserved it.
They weren't holding anybody at gunpoint, they weren't going in and terrorising the staff. And again, I think that's why some people were saying it was a victimless crime. I think some people thought at the beginning, whoever's doing this is smart in a way, because a lot of people don't really like banks to begin with anyway.
The damage to the buildings once the diggers gone into it was huge. Large gaping holes, to the point where certainly amongst social media, the groups responsible were nicknamed the Hole in the Wall gang. I had immediate strategies to highlight the impact that this was having on local community, but also that those responsible weren't there to get their own back on the banks, but it was there to line their own pockets and to further their own criminal enterprises.
For the Antrim OCG, the risk of being caught was outweighed by the potential reward. Richard wanted to change that and turned to the bank's security to take a proactive approach in limiting the OCG's success.
What we were able to do was something very, very simple, was reduce the cash holdings in some high-risk ATMs and put a sign up, a simple sign up, due to ATM attacks in this area, there has been a reduction in cash holdings in this ATM. Now, the kickback was, unfortunately, over weekends and bank holiday weekends, the cash ran out. But the signage actually was quite important, and we got feedback from the public to say, you know something, that's probably the simplest, cheapest mitigation, security mitigation you have, because they will take notice. We were spending thousands and thousands of pounds on other technologies and mitigations, but a simple sign, and none of those ATMs that had signage were ever hit. The cash loss, initially there was some significant numbers, but because of course they were fully loaded at that stage before we started to defund the ATMs. However, there was only, I think, one, maybe two that were sitting in six-figure loss. The cash loss was insignificant compared to the collateral damage.
The pressure to bring this to a conclusion, despite us being 6-7 weeks into it, was immense, and something that we had to make a breakthrough on one of the gangs at some point.
While the Antrim OCG was continuing the attacks at pace, intelligence had been slowly trickling in, leading to a breakthrough.
Jamie McConnell, David McClurkin, Kenneth Clark, and Gary Kincaid. The four names were no surprise to me.
The men were well known to police.
They were indeed from the local area. It all made sense. And then some of them were very adept and had experience in using diggers. When you have it narrowed down, you've got to find out every minor detail you can about how they live their day-to-day lives, what makes them tick, to get yourself into the best position that you can to make it stick when you do arrest them and you want to charge them. You're balancing that with all the other pressures, and that is why ultimately myself and the team had worked 62 days in a row. That is what was required.
The Antrim OCG had been meticulous and had left no forensic traces at any of the scenes. Richard knew he was going to have to catch them in the act. but this meant officers potentially being put directly in the path of danger.
Uniformed officers working extremely long hours at night, often potentially being faced with a very risky scenario if they come across one of these crimes in action, and how they're going to manage that, and how we ensure that it's safely brought to a conclusion.
A police officer's natural instinct is always to run towards trouble. If something's happening, they want to stop it happening. However, when it involves a large piece of heavy plant machinery and you as a police officer are standing in the way of their escape route, that was where my concerns became very real.
However, Richard had been developing a plan.
Using the mapping and risk register of ATMs, that allowed me to come up with a very effective plan to focus on hotspots within a certain defined area of where the various gangs lived, so that when an attack happened, I could bring all of our overt resources to bear. I knew it was only a matter of time before they were going to make another attack. The nights were getting shorter. They were greedy. They wanted as much money as they can. But I knew at some point they had to retreat back into their patch, so to speak, so that they could maximize the number of attacks and get away quickly, because they were definitely feeling the heat. There's no doubt about that. I knew that they were out wrecking various sites, and it was a case of which one are they going to pick.
Richard wanted to keep his uniform resources close to the sites of the most at-risk ATMs. He believed deploying them to the scene as quickly as possible would force the Antrim OCG into a mistake, and he didn't have to wait long to test his theory. At 3 a.m, a pickup drives into the supermarket car park. It stops in front of a double cash machine. 2 men get out. They meet a tractor towing a digger, both stolen from nearby. The digger prepped for unloading from the flatbed trailer. One of the men gets into the cab and drives the digger off the trailer, through bollards, towards the cash machines, which are ripped out. The tractor is set alight. The cash machines loaded onto the pickup, and the gang make their getaway.
That dreaded phone call that I got so many times in the early hours of the morning came. It was a double ATM attack, and I activated the plan. Everything that I could get, I threw at it. And it was so intensive that in a 3-hour period after that, I took and received in the region of 130 phone calls on 2 work phones that I had, not including the police radio I had as well. What we quickly established after the Ballymena attack happened was they had driven to another location in a rural area with the ATM machine, and they had another car planted, which they got into in an effort to get away. We nearly got them. The police descended on it. We had other measures in place that allowed us to lead us to that car.
The patrol car landed just as they were making off. One of the guys actually, pulled down his trousers and mounted the police. This is whenever I suppose you could pardon the pun, the wheels started to come off, because they'd burnt vehicles, they'd jumped out of their getaway vehicle, all the rest of it. But this is whenever they started to, I think, really taunt the police.
Yes, they got away, but they were lucky.
Robbers left the scene with the 2 cash machines on the back of a pickup truck, but when police caught up with them, they abandoned the vehicle and the machines in the driveway of a nearby home. they escaped on foot.
It was the nearest of misses, but given how close they had been, Richard had faith the plan would work. And just 4 days later, he was given another chance.
The phone rings again in the early hours of the morning. There's another attack. And this time it's on the Tully Road near Belfast International Airport.
Nuts Corner, again, very rural area. The owner, he had woken up, I think, in the middle of the night, around 3:30 again, just as the digger, whatever was used to actually get the ATM machine, just as it was being set on fire.
Again, within the catchment area that I had mapped out. And again, it was, let's throw everything at this. The words that the controller said to me on the phone was, we've got runners. And that's when I knew we have them. As the arrests came in, the names didn't mean a thing to me. As night moved into morning, we quickly established that these weren't the gang.
It wasn't the Antrim OCG that Richard had been looking for, but others working in the same area.
We made a series of 27 searches that day. As a result of that attack, we were able to ultimately charge the 4 that we had arrested with that attack. And ultimately, what that did do with the arrests that we made on the 30th, that was the end of the digger rip-out attacks that Northern Ireland had experienced. It was curious, but just suddenly stopped. I knew, and I had anticipated this because the nights were very, very short at that stage.
Although the task force had made 4 arrests, Richard knew the Antrim OCG members were still at large.
The question for me was, were they wanting or willing to chance their luck again? And I knew they would. In keeping with tradition, criminals will adopt the approach of, let's have the heat die down a little bit, and then we'll go back and do it all over again. I knew what they were up to. They had a good idea what I was up to, but I knew they would come at it again, and I would leave them a surprise for when they did.
While the attacks ended with the brighter nights, the task force worked tirelessly, enhancing ATM security and securing heavy machinery and farm equipment.
So you've got a multifaceted approach that you're trying to employ, and that takes time. It doesn't happen overnight. There's a price tag associated with it.
Richard had been in close contact with business leaders for months, ensuring they were prepared.
My name is Glenn Roberts. I'm Chief Executive Retail and I. We are the main representative body for the independent retail and wholesale sector in Northern Ireland. Not for 1 minute did we think that this was over. We had to be constantly vigilant. Obviously our members upped their game in terms of taking the security procedures. Many of them created almost bunkers. They put concrete bollards in front of them. The ATM manufacturers made sure that they were looking again at the security of these machines. We were getting across to our members, please don't have these ATMs filled up at night. And to the general public to make sure they're aware of it, engaging with the construction sector to make sure plant equipment and machinery was secured.
As the darker nights drew in, Richard was left to wait.
It was in the forefront of my mind, the hours are going to change at the end of October. Are these attacks going to start again? Are our plans robust enough to deal with any resurgence in it? When an attack happened on the 6th of December 2019, when the dreaded phone call came in the middle of the night again, I knew immediately what it was. But when I found out where it was, then it was a case of, I think I've got them this time. Because we knew exactly where that ATM machine was going.
3 a.m., a supermarket is targeted. A tractor and digger, stolen nearby, are driven into the car park. They're used to remove the ATMs, which are loaded onto a getaway vehicle. The digger and tractor are then set alight. A vehicle loaded with cash machines is seen leaving the scene. Richard had laid a trap that the OCG were walking straight into.
The OCG has come through up into the main entrance around the back of the petrol station to the main building. And they've had a vehicle and a trailer and a digger and a number of individuals who had their identities hidden by masks and boiler suits on. This is all done in a very short period of time, in the space of a couple of minutes. And they've ripped out the ATM machine and made good their escape very effectively, very quickly, out into the countryside. It was a very brazen attack, very close to the local police station. So it was a change of tactic.
But Richard's plan was about to go into action.
As soon as I get the phone call and I'm told where it was stolen, whilst it always comes as a shock, I was happy because I knew that ATM had a certain measures in it that would allow me to quickly identify where they were taking it to.
The extra budget that we were given by our business leads means that we could buy extra equipment, which we put on permanent loan to the police.
We had security measures which enabled us to be able to follow the location of the ATM.
We were able to relay that very quickly to responding officers. So rather than everybody go to where the attack has happened, it's everywhere goes to where the ATM is. We initiated the plan that I had put in place. Basically involved me telling them, send everybody.
They successfully got the ATM out of the housing. They were definitely unaware of the speed with which we responded.
Police crews from different parts of the police descended on here from as far away as Belfast. The ATMs themselves are heavy, so you can't travel fast and you can't travel too far along backcountry roads. Nonetheless, we were able to locate the position, direct the resources into that location. All I can imagine was that they looked up onto the dark sky and saw a haze of blue lights coming towards their location. That would have been a good shock for them, which is what they needed.
The gang had gotten away, but the police's quick response had forced them into making a mistake.
At the location, when police arrived, they find the stolen ATM. A number of discarded items have been left there by those responsible, which allowed us, again, very significant forensic opportunities that we were able to exploit.
We found the ATMs intact, the cash hadn't been taken out of them.
Crucially, the speed of the police response allowed crime scene investigators to gather both fingerprints and DNA from the scene.
With the sufficient evidence that we needed, we knew we'd got them.
That ultimately led us to identify and arrest the members of the OCG responsible, namely McConnell, Kincaid, and McClurkin and Clark.
When those arrests happened, we were obviously able to, at last, give a good news story to our communities, which was fantastic. And I think it was a vindication for those officers who'd spent hours of time across that period, quite a long period, working towards that particular outcome. So having that conversation with communities was very rewarding.
It was extremely welcome news that they were arrested because it sent the signal out that these criminal gangs could be caught, and they didn't have a blank check to attack and plunder willy-nilly.
But the job wasn't over. Police had to make sure they had enough evidence to convict and turned their attention to mobile phones to link the gang members to the other attacks.
So for this investigation, the digital forensics was key. As technology evolves, the reliance upon that technology amongst all of us means that we literally can't go outside the door without some type of device. Now, they leave a trail, like a breadcrumb trail. And the task for us was placing members of OCGs in the particular area, in the particular scene at the relevant time, so that, and then attribute that to those individuals, which will prove their presence at the time of the offences. We were able to prove through the use of digital forensics that the four were present at several of the ATM attacks, and that they had in fact carried out or conspired to carry out those attacks.
Many followed the trial closely, including lawyer Dara Mackin.
This was one of the greatest criminal enterprises in recent times, and certainly one of the most complex criminal investigations. I think the sheer size of the criminal enterprise is quite stark. This isn't the traditional thief in the jeweller shop pocketing the diamond watch. This was something of a much greater scale. This was a circumstantial case, and what that means is that maybe one strand of evidence in itself isn't enough to prove guilt. However, when you put the strands together, many threads make a strong rope.
Although police couldn't charge them with every incident, they were still able to build a strong case.
Those factors taken together not only proved that each of the individuals at different times were in contact with different exhibits, such as vehicles, but also showed that they were in contact at material times, and also were in the vicinity of certain locations at material times.
While circumstantial, Richard's case was, however, still compelling.
Ultimately, the individuals in this case accepted that they played a role in the offences in question. Now, whilst they didn't accept the totality of the offence, didn't accept being present, they did accept being involved at different levels. Mr. Clark was handed 5 years and 8 months. Mr. McConnell was given a lesser sentence of 3 years and 8 months. Mr. Kincaid was given a sentence of 11 months. And Mr. McClurkin was given a combination order, given the fact that he was charged with a lesser offence than the other two suspects.
The sentences were based on the degree of involvement each admitted.
Not a lot for the amount that they did, and the fact that the money, the majority of the money, including the criminal damage to all the properties and the diggers and stuff, all that, amounted to like well over £2 million.
What we've seen here was very, very unique, in which the Director of Public Prosecutions referred the case to the Court of Appeal, as he felt that the sentences were unduly lenient. The Court of Appeal did increase one of the sentences on behalf of Mr. Clark, but refused to increase the sentence of Mr. McConnell.
McConnell's sentence stayed the same due to mitigating factors, and the sentences of the other two men were deemed appropriate and were not appealed.
The impact of losses of ATMs would have a massive impact that isn't perhaps apparent to many looking in. They bring a vital service to shops themselves, to retailers. In fact, when an ATM is put into a shop, it increases footfall within that shop by about 10%, and it enables people to have quick and easy access to their own money.
A lot of those rural areas really do still rely on cash, especially the more elderly population. So a lot of those wee businesses, people maybe only go in and buy something in the shop or get a coffee or whatever because there's an ATM machine outside. So it's so vital to the local economy. These ATM machines themselves cost about 16 grand, I think, sometimes, the actual equipment in itself and replacing the walls around it and things like that. So that is how the business did suffer.
You can't underestimate the stress that has on not just the business owner and indeed their staff, but the local community as well.
And there's long-lasting effects on local communities. You know, a shop in a small village or hamlet, you know, essentially it's the heart of that very small community. And when it's put out of action because someone decided that it'd be a good idea to line their own pockets with the contents of the ATM, it really does leave its impact. And to this day, you can still see the scars of it 6 years on. You still see some shops which haven't been able to replace that ATM.
From a police standpoint, however, there was still cause to be proud.
Once you've got them, you're just relieved that you don't have to go, or anyone else has to go through that again. You're also relieved that you have, to some extent, nothing's ever foolproof, but to some extent, have future-proofed the ATM estate. And your job ultimately is to catch the bad guys and put them behind bars where they belong. And that was the satisfying part of that.
For some, the sentences didn't seem to match the devastation that had been left behind.
We would have much preferred that these crime gangs got much stronger sentences. I think it was good that they were caught. It was good that they were ultimately before the courts and did get sentenced. But we would have much preferred much stronger sentences to put down the provision that if you do this, you will get caught.
I think the whole country was relieved because, again, you're sitting in maybe your town hadn't been hit yet, but it could have been anybody at any time. So, yeah, really, really glad to hear they've been caught. It's just a pity it took so long, but it's the damage they caused until they got there. I think that's the lasting legacy of it.
It's extremely difficult to put a figure, but certainly this would be running into millions of pounds worth of damage. Because it just wasn't the damage that was done to the store. It was the loss of trade. It was the increased insurance premiums. And it was the, if you like, the psychological, emotional damage that was done as well.
Sometimes I wonder if they hadn't have gotten so sort of cocky. Like, would they have been caught if they had just kept going the way they were going, you know, very quickly, hitting up smaller places, smaller service stations that were more rural in the middle of nowhere with no CCTV? Would they have been caught? But in the end, it is sort of like a novel or something, you know, that they did their own sort of greed, their own sort of pride, and you know, how untouchable they thought they were. That's what maybe got them in the end.
For Richard, the threat posed to local communities by groups like the Antrim OCG remains.
Will ATM attacks occur again? Absolutely. We try to keep ahead of OCGs. OCGs try to keep ahead of us. They find a way, and then we have to find another way to counter that. And so the process goes on. We will always be committed to tackling it, to catching those who are involved. And you will be caught. No matter how hard you try, your luck runs out sometime, and we will catch you.